My name is Anya, and I'm 45 years old. For 22 of those years, I dedicated my life to InnovateTech, a company that prided itself on being at the forefront of digital innovation. I started as a junior software developer, fresh out of college, and worked my way up through the ranks, contributing to some of their most groundbreaking projects. This wasn't just a job, it was my career, my community, my professional home. I poured my heart and soul into every line of code, every late-night debugging session, and every team meeting. InnovateTech was known for its modern culture, its vibrant open-plan offices, and its seemingly progressive values. They talked a good game about diversity and inclusion, plastered slogans on their walls, and featured employees from all backgrounds in their marketing materials. For years, I believed in that vision, or at least I wanted to. I saw myself as a testament to their commitment, a Black woman thriving in a predominantly white, male-dominated tech space. My performance reviews were consistently excellent, my projects delivered on time and under budget, and I was often the go-to person for complex technical challenges. The culmination of my long service was a significant pension bonus, a substantial sum promised to employees who reached the 2-decade mark with a strong performance record. It wasn't just a financial reward, it was recognition, a symbol of my enduring value to the company. I had plans for that money, dreams of finally buying a small cabin upstate, a quiet retreat from the city's hustle. This bonus was something I had worked towards, meticulously planned for, and frankly, earned with every ounce of my effort. It represented security, the fruit of my labor, and a well-deserved acknowledgement of my loyalty. As I approached my 20-year anniversary, the excitement was palpable, a quiet anticipation building within me. Then came Mr. Harrison. He joined InnovateTech as the new head of engineering just 6 months before my 20-year milestone. On paper, he was impressive, Ivy League educated, a background in disruptive startups, and a reputation for streamlining departments. He was everything the company's modern facade represented, sleek and seemingly efficient. From our first team meeting, there was an unspoken tension, a subtle shift in the office atmosphere. Mr. Harrison had a way of looking through people, not at them, especially those who didn't fit his preconceived notions of talent. He favored a certain type of employee, a younger, often less experienced cohort who mirrored his own background. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, attributing his distant demeanor to the pressures of a new role. Perhaps he was just adjusting, I told myself. Maybe he was simply focused on implementing his new strategies, too busy to connect with long-standing employees. I hoped that my reputation and years of service would speak for themselves. My colleagues, especially those of us who had been with the company for a long time, noticed it too. The new modern culture he championed felt less about innovation and more about conformity. He subtly dismissed established processes, preferring to rebuild rather than understand what already worked. The whisper started, "He's shaking things up. He's got a vision." But beneath the surface, there was a growing unease. His vision seemed to systematically marginalize those who didn't fit his narrow definition of a cultural fit, a term that often felt like a thinly veiled euphemism. I noticed he rarely sought my input, even on projects where my historical knowledge was invaluable. My suggestions in meetings were often met with a polite nod, only to be reiterated by a younger, male colleague minutes later and praised as brilliant. It was a familiar pattern, one I had hoped to leave behind in earlier stages of my career. The conversations about my pension bonus, which had been regular with my previous manager, suddenly stopped. Emails to HR about the finalization process went unanswered or were met with vague responses. A knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach, a premonition that something was amiss. I reminded myself of my track record, my unwavering commitment, and the explicit terms of my employment contract. There was no reason for any delay or issue. This bonus was a contractual obligation, not a discretionary gift. I held on to that certainty, trying to quell the rising tide of apprehension. But the feeling persisted, a cold dread that slowly crept into my daily routine. The modern facade of InnovateTech, once a source of pride, now felt like a thin veil, barely concealing something far less progressive beneath its polished surface. I knew, deep down, that my fight was just beginning. The first direct sign came in a casual conversation that felt anything but. Mr. Harrison called me into his office, a sleek, minimalist space with glass walls, ostensibly to discuss my upcoming projects. He leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips as he began to speak about my future at InnovateTech. He complimented my dedication and loyalty, words that felt hollow and insincere coming from him. Then he shifted, subtly suggesting that perhaps my long tenure meant I was less adaptable to the rapid changes in the tech landscape. He spoke of fresh perspectives and agility, terms that felt like veiled criticisms of my experience. "Anya," he said, his voice smooth, "we're looking at optimizing our long-term financial commitments. These legacy bonus structures can be quite a burden on a growing company." The word legacy hung in the air, a thinly disguised jab at my 2 decades of service. It was the first time anyone had ever framed my pension bonus as a burden. He then brought up a recent project, one I had successfully led, but he highlighted a minor, almost negligible delay that had occurred due to an external vendor. He inflated its significance, implying it reflected a lack of proactive management on my part. It was a deliberate attempt to chip away at my impeccable record. I pushed back gently, explaining the circumstances, but he merely nodded, his eyes already glazing over. It was clear he wasn't interested in a genuine discussion, only in planting seeds of doubt. The conversation ended with him vaguely mentioning restructuring and reevaluating all long-term incentives. The next week, I found myself inexplicably removed from a high-profile project I was slated to lead. The explanation given was that my expertise was needed elsewhere, on a less visible, more tedious task. It felt like a demotion, a deliberate sidelining designed to diminish my impact and visibility within the company. My colleague, Lena, who had been with InnovateTech almost as long as I had, noticed it immediately. "He's doing it to you too, isn't he?" she whispered during a coffee break, her eyes filled with a knowing concern. Lena, a white woman, had also been subtly sidelined since Mr. Harrison's arrival, though not with the same intensity. She told me about other long-term employees, particularly those from diverse backgrounds, who were experiencing similar treatment. Their projects were being reassigned, their contributions overlooked, and their roles subtly diminished. It wasn't just me. It was a pattern, a quiet purge of anyone who didn't fit Mr. Harrison's new mold. The pattern became clearer. Any project I touched, no matter how successful, was scrutinized with a magnifying glass for the smallest flaw. My achievements were downplayed, while my minor missteps were amplified and discussed in team meetings as learning opportunities, always with a pointed glance in my direction. I started documenting everything: the dates of our conversations, the projects I was removed from, the subtle slights in meetings. My phone became my silent witness, recording times and details, building a meticulous log of every interaction that fell off. I knew instinctively that I would need proof. The HR department, which once seemed approachable, now felt like a fortress. My attempts to schedule meetings were met with delays, or I was redirected to junior staff who offered generic, unhelpful advice. The open-door policy was clearly only for certain doors, and mine seemed to be firmly shut. The pressure began to mount. I felt a constant need to prove myself, to work twice as hard just to maintain my standing. The joy I once found in my work began to erode, replaced by a gnawing anxiety and a sense of being constantly under siege. This wasn't the InnovateTech I had dedicated my life to. One afternoon, I overheard Mr. Harrison in the hallway speaking to another manager. He mentioned legacy hires and cultural adjustments, his voice low but clear. "We need to ensure our compensation structures reflect current market value, not historical sentiment," he said, a thinly veiled reference to my pension bonus. He didn't mention my name, but I knew he was talking about me. The casual cruelty of his words, the way he dehumanized my 2 decades of service into historical sentiment, solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, dignity, and the insidious nature of systemic bias. I started to research employment law, specifically regarding age and racial discrimination. The more I read, the more I realized that Mr. Harrison's actions, while subtle, were part of a larger, well-documented playbook used to push out long-term, often diverse, employees without triggering direct legal action. The modern culture of InnovateTech, with its emphasis on innovation and agility, was being weaponized. It was a smokescreen for a deeper, more insidious agenda, to replace experienced, higher-paid employees with younger, cheaper talent, often at the expense of diversity. My heart ached with a mix of anger and disappointment. I had believed in this company, had given it my prime years. To be dismissed and undermined in such a calculated way felt like a profound betrayal. But that betrayal also ignited a fire within me, a fierce determination to fight back. I knew that this wasn't just about my pension bonus anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for Lena, and for countless others who might be facing similar, subtle forms of discrimination. I would not let Mr. Harrison's prejudice erase 2 decades of my hard work and dedication. The pretense of professional courtesy finally dropped. Mr. Harrison called me into his office again, this time with an HR representative, Ms. Jenkins, present. The atmosphere was colder, more formal, and the air crackled with unspoken tension. This wasn't a casual chat, it was an ambush. He began by presenting a fabricated performance review, filled with vague criticisms and unsubstantiated claims. It cited lack of adaptability, resistance to new methodologies, and failure to integrate with new team dynamics. Each point was a direct contradiction to my actual performance record. "Anya," Mr. Harrison stated, his tone devoid of warmth, "your performance has been inconsistent. This makes it difficult to justify certain long-term financial commitments." He gestured vaguely towards my pension bonus, making it clear that this was the target. Ms. Jenkins nodded along, her face impassive. I calmly refuted each point, presenting my own meticulously kept records, project completion reports, glowing client testimonials, and emails from colleagues praising my contributions. I had anticipated this, preparing for weeks, but the audacity of their lies still stung. Mr. Harrison waved a dismissive hand. "These are historical data, Anya. We're looking at current performance and future potential." It was a blatant attempt to invalidate my 2 decades of exemplary service, to erase my past contributions as if they never existed. Ms. Jenkins then chimed in, her voice clinical. "The company reserves the right to review and adjust bonus structures based on evolving business needs and individual performance metrics." It was corporate speak designed to sound legitimate while stripping away my contractual rights. They presented a revised offer for my pension bonus, a fraction of the amount I was contractually owed, tied to a new set of performance targets that were almost impossible to meet. It was an insult, a clear attempt to force me to either accept a pittance or quit in frustration. "This is unacceptable," I stated, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I have a contract. My performance has been exemplary for 22 years. This is a clear attempt to renege on a binding agreement." Mr. Harrison merely smirked, his eyes glinting with a cold satisfaction. "We believe this is a fair and equitable offer, Anya," he said, leaning forward. "Consider it carefully. Litigation is a lengthy and expensive process, and we have a team of lawyers ready." It was a thinly veiled threat, designed to intimidate me into submission. I looked at Miss Jenkins, hoping for some sign of empathy, but her face remained a blank mask. It was clear she was complicit, or at least unwilling to challenge Mr. Harrison. The modern HR department was just another tool in their discriminatory arsenal. That night I called Lena. She listened patiently, her anger palpable through the phone. "I knew it," she said, her voice tight. "He's doing this to everyone who's been here a while, especially us. He wants to clear house." Her words validated my suspicions and fueled my resolve. Lena shared stories of other colleagues who had quietly left after similar performance reviews and reduced offers. They hadn't fought back, fearing the legal costs and the damage to their careers. Their silence had emboldened Mr. Harrison, making him believe he was untouchable. But I wasn't them. I had spent 2 decades building my career, contributing to this company. I wasn't going to let a racist boss sabotage my future and erase my legacy without a fight. The cabin upstate, my dream, felt further away than ever, but my determination to reach it only intensified. I spent the next few days meticulously organizing all my documentation, emails, performance reviews, project reports, and the notes from my meetings with Mr. Harrison and Ms. Jenkins. Every piece of paper, every digital file, became a weapon in my arsenal. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was overshadowed by a burning sense of injustice. I was not just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every long-term employee, every person of color who had been undervalued and undermined in the corporate world. The days after that meeting were a blur of quiet, intense preparation. I knew I couldn't fight InnovateTech alone. Their legal team was vast, their resources seemingly limitless. I needed an ally, someone who understood the intricacies of employment law and the subtle dance of corporate discrimination. Lena, true to her word, connected me with Ms. Davies, a formidable employment lawyer known for her tenacity and her success in discrimination cases. Our first meeting was a revelation. Ms. Davies listened patiently, taking detailed notes, her expression a mix of empathy and steely resolve. "This isn't just about your pension bonus, Anya," Ms. Davies stated, her voice calm but firm. "This is about a pattern of discriminatory practices. Mr. Harrison's actions and HR's complicity suggest a systemic issue, not just an isolated incident." Her words resonated deeply with me. She advised me to continue documenting everything, but also to be careful. "They will try to find any reason to discredit you, to paint you as difficult or uncooperative," she warned. "Maintain your professionalism, but do not back down from your rights." I continued to go to work, maintaining my usual routine, but every interaction felt like a chess match. I was polite, efficient, and outwardly calm, but internally, I was a coiled spring, observing, analyzing, and documenting every subtle slight and overt attempt to undermine me. Mr. Harrison's behavior became more aggressive. He started assigning me to projects that were clearly designed to fail, or tasks that were beneath my skill level, hoping I would quit out of frustration. He also began to spread rumors, subtly questioning my commitment and my fit within the company's new direction. My colleagues, sensing the shift, either avoided me or offered hesitant, sympathetic glances. The vibrant, modern culture of InnovateTech felt increasingly toxic, a place where loyalty was punished and experience was devalued. I felt isolated, but not alone, knowing Ms. Davies was in my corner. One particularly difficult day, Mr. Harrison publicly questioned a technical decision I had made, implying I was outdated in my approach. It was a calculated humiliation, designed to erode my professional credibility in front of my peers. I calmly presented data supporting my decision, but the damage was intended. The emotional toll was immense. There were nights I couldn't sleep, replaying conversations, analyzing every word, every look. The stress gnawed at me, affecting my appetite and my concentration. But each time I felt like giving up, I remember the years I had invested and the principle I was fighting for. Ms. Davies advised me to file a formal internal complaint with HR, detailing the discrimination and the attempts to sabotage my pension bonus. "It's a necessary step," she explained. "It creates a paper trail and forces them to respond, even if they try to dismiss it." I drafted the complaint meticulously, with Ms. Davies' guidance, ensuring every incident was clearly documented and linked to Mr. Harrison's discriminatory behavior. It was a powerful document, a testament to the quiet suffering I had endured and my unwavering resolve to seek justice. The response from HR was predictably dismissive. They acknowledged receipt of my complaint, but stated they found no evidence of discrimination and that Mr. Harrison's actions were within the scope of performance management. It was a whitewash, a corporate cover-up designed to protect their own. But that dismissal was exactly what Ms. Davies had anticipated. "Their denial is our next piece of evidence," she said, her voice triumphant. "It shows their unwillingness to address the issue internally, which strengthens our case for external action." I knew then that this battle would not be fought within the confines of InnovateTech's polished glass walls. It would be fought in a different arena, one where the rules were clearer and the stakes were higher. My silent battle was about to become a very public fight. With HR's predictable dismissal, the gloves came off. Ms. Davies filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EOC, detailing the pattern of discrimination, the fabricated performance review, and the blatant attempt to sabotage my pension bonus. This was no longer just an internal dispute, it was a federal investigation. The atmosphere at InnovateTech shifted dramatically. Mr. Harrison, once smug and confident, now looked visibly agitated. HR representatives started appearing more frequently, their faces grim. The whispers in the hallways intensified, but this time they were about me, not just about Mr. Harrison. I was called into multiple meetings with HR and InnovateTech's legal team. They tried to intimidate me, to wear me down with endless questions and veiled accusations. They questioned my motives, my work ethic, and even my mental stability, trying to portray me as a disgruntled employee. Anya, are you sure you're not just misunderstanding Mr. Harrison's management style? One of their lawyers asked, his tone condescending. Perhaps you're feeling sensitive due to the changes in the company. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to be swayed. My understanding is based on 2 decades of consistent performance and a clear contractual agreement. I replied, my voice calm and firm. And my sensitivity is to blatant discrimination and attempts to defraud me of what I've earned. Miss Davies had prepared me for this. She advised me to answer truthfully but succinctly, to avoid emotional responses, and to never waver from the facts. Each meeting was exhausting, a test of my endurance, but I held my ground, remembering the justice I sought. Mr. Harrison, in a desperate attempt to further undermine me, started assigning me to projects that required extensive travel, knowing I had family commitments. He hoped the inconvenience would force me to resign, but I refused to give him the satisfaction. I adjusted my schedule, worked remotely when possible, and continued to deliver. The social isolation intensified. Some colleagues, fearing repercussions, actively avoided me. Others, however, began to show quiet signs of support. Lena was my rock, always there with a sympathetic ear, a shared meal, or a much-needed laugh. Her solidarity was invaluable. One day, a former colleague, David, who had left InnovateTech a few months prior, reached out to me. He had heard about my EEOC complaint. Anya, I know what you're going through, he said. Harrison tried to do the same to me, but I didn't have the fight in me then. David provided me with crucial information. Details about Mr. Harrison's past at other companies, a pattern of similar behavior, and even a few internal emails that hinted at a broader strategy to cut costs by targeting long-term employees. This was the evidence Ms. Davies needed to connect the dots. The EEOC investigation gained momentum. InnovateTech was forced to provide extensive documentation, including internal communications, performance reviews of other employees, and financial records. Ms. Davies and her team meticulously combed through every document, searching for the smoking gun. The company's modern facade was cracking under the pressure. The sleek offices now felt like a cage, the open plan design a constant reminder of the watchful eyes and the pervasive tension. But the more they pushed, the stronger my resolve became. I realized that this fight was bigger than just my pension bonus. It was about exposing the hypocrisy of a company that preached diversity while practicing systemic discrimination. It was about holding powerful individuals accountable for their prejudice. The emotional toll was still heavy, but I found strength in the fight itself. Each step forward, each small victory, reaffirmed my belief that what I was doing was right. I was no longer just an employee. I was a warrior fighting for justice. The EEOC investigation progressed, forcing InnovateTech to confront the mounting evidence. Mr. Harrison, increasingly desperate, escalated his tactics. He tried to have me formally disciplined for minor infractions, hoping to create a paper trail that would justify my termination. Each attempt was met with a swift counter from Ms. Davies. He even tried to spread rumors outside the company, contacting mutual professional acquaintances and subtly discrediting my reputation. But my network was strong, built over 2 decades, and most people saw through his transparent attempts at character assassination. The company's legal team, led by a sharp, aggressive attorney named Mr. Thorne, began to push for mediation. They wanted to settle quietly, to make this go away before it became a public scandal. Ms. Davies, however, advised me to hold firm. "They're scared, Anya," she told me. "They know we have a strong case." During one particularly tense mediation session, Mr. Thorne presented a new, slightly improved settlement offer, still far less than what I was owed, but packaged with a non-disclosure agreement. "This is a generous offer, Anya," he said. "It allows you to move on quietly and avoid further public scrutiny." I looked at Mr. Harrison, who sat across the table, his face a mask of feigned concern. I saw the fear in his eyes, the desperation to make me disappear. But I also saw the continued arrogance, the belief that he could still control the narrative. "I didn't come this far to be silenced," I stated, rejecting the offer. "I came for justice, and for what I am owed. And I will not sign away my right to speak about what happened here. Miss Davies nodded approvingly beside me. The mediation failed, and the case moved closer to a public hearing. This was exactly what Miss Davies wanted. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, she often said. They thrive in the shadows. We're going to bring this into the light. Unexpectedly, a senior executive at InnovateTech, Ms. Chun, reached out to Ms. Davies. Ms. Chun was a highly respected figure, known for her integrity, and she had been with the company even longer than I had. She had observed Mr. Harrison's behavior and was deeply disturbed by it. Ms. Chin provided Ms. Davies with internal memos and confidential reports that detailed Mr. Harrison's cost-cutting initiatives, which disproportionately targeted long-term, diverse employees. These documents explicitly outlined strategies to reduce legacy liabilities, a direct reference to pension bonuses and higher salaries. This was a game-changer. It wasn't just Mr. Harrison's individual racism anymore. It was a systemic strategy, sanctioned, or at least tolerated, by higher management. The modern tech company was actively engaged in discriminatory practices under the guise of efficiency. The discovery process intensified. With Ms. Chen's information, Ms. Davies was able to demand even more sensitive internal documents. The company's legal team was scrambling, trying to contain the damage, but the truth was slowly, inexorably coming to light. I continued to work, but my focus had shifted. My daily tasks felt secondary to the larger battle. I was no longer just an employee. I was a whistleblower, an accidental activist, fighting for a principle far greater than my own financial gain. The emotional and mental strain was immense, but the support from Ms. Davies, Lena, and now Ms. Chun gave me strength. I wasn't just fighting Mr. Harrison. I was fighting for a more equitable future, for a workplace where dedication and talent were valued, regardless of age or race. The day of the hearing arrived, a crisp autumn morning that felt charged with significance. I walked into the federal courthouse with Ms. Davies, my heart pounding, but my resolve unwavering. This was it, the culmination of months of quiet struggle and relentless preparation. InnovateTech's legal team, led by Mr. Thorne, was formidable. Mr. Harrison sat beside them, his usual smugness replaced by a nervous tension. He avoided my gaze, his face pale, clearly uncomfortable with the public scrutiny. The courtroom was filled with observers, including Lena and Ms. Chun, their presence a silent source of strength. Ms. Davies began her opening statement, laying out the meticulous timeline of Mr. Harrison's discriminatory actions, the fabricated performance reviews, and the attempts to sabotage my pension bonus. She presented my 2 decades of exemplary service, contrasting it with the sudden, baseless attacks on my performance. This is not a case about individual performance, Ms. Davies declared, her voice resonating through the courtroom. This is a case about systemic discrimination, about a company that preached diversity but practiced exclusion, and about a racist boss who tried to erase 2 decades of dedication. Mr. Thorne countered, attempting to paint me as a disgruntled employee, resistant to change, and solely motivated by financial gain. He presented selective data, trying to discredit my work and portray Mr. Harrison's actions as legitimate performance management. It was a predictable, but frustrating, narrative. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke calmly and clearly, recounting every detail, every subtle slight, every overt act of sabotage. I presented my meticulously kept records, my emails, and my performance reviews, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. I described the emotional toll, the isolation, and the betrayal, but I did so with dignity, refusing to let them see my vulnerability. I was a professional, a dedicated employee, and I was here to seek justice, not sympathy. Mr. Thorne's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to trip me up, to make me angry, to expose any perceived weakness. He questioned my motives, my integrity, and even my memory. But Ms. Davies had prepared me for every tactic, and I remained steadfast. Ms. Anya, he pressed, isn't it true that you were simply unwilling to adapt to new leadership? I met his gaze. Mr. Thorne, my willingness to adapt was always to innovation and progress, not to discrimination and injustice. The turning point came when Ms. Davies called Ms. Chun to testify. Ms. Chun, a respected figure, provided damning testimony about Mr. Harrison's cost-cutting initiatives and the internal memos that explicitly targeted long-term employees, particularly those with higher salaries and pension liabilities. She detailed how these initiatives disproportionately affected older employees and employees of color, creating a pattern of systemic discrimination under the guise of modernization. Her testimony was a powerful indictment of InnovateTech's true practices. The evidence mounted: internal emails, HR reports, and financial analyses that showed a clear correlation between Mr. Harrison's tenure and a significant reduction in long-term employee benefits, particularly for minority staff. The modern facade of InnovateTech was crumbling. Mr. Harrison's face grew paler with each revelation. He had believed his actions were hidden, protected by corporate layers, but Ms. Davies had systematically peeled back every layer, exposing the ugly truth beneath. The judge, a stern but fair woman, listened intently, her expression unreadable. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. The fight was far from over, but the tide had definitively turned in my favor. The final day of the hearing arrived, heavy with anticipation. The judge was set to deliver her ruling, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Mr. Harrison looked defeated, his usual arrogance replaced by a visible tremor. Mr. Thorne, his lawyer, looked grim. Ms. Davies had presented a compelling closing argument, weaving together the threads of individual prejudice and systemic discrimination. She highlighted how Mr. Harrison's racist actions were not isolated, but rather a symptom of a deeper, corporate strategy to cut costs at the expense of loyal, diverse employees. The judge began to speak, her voice clear and authoritative. She meticulously reviewed the evidence. My 2 decades of stellar performance, the fabricated reviews, Mr. Harrison's discriminatory remarks, and crucially, Ms. Chen's testimony about the internal cost-cutting directives. The court finds, the judge stated, her gaze sweeping across the room, that Mr. Harrison engaged in a pattern of discriminatory behavior against Ms. Anya, specifically targeting her pension bonus and professional standing due to her race and long tenure. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. She continued, furthermore, the evidence presented by Ms. Davies, including internal company documents, strongly suggests that Mr. Harrison's actions were not merely individual prejudice, but part of a broader, systemic practice within InnovateTech to reduce legacy liabilities by disproportionately impacting long-term, diverse employees. This was the twist. It wasn't just about Mr. Harrison anymore. My fight had uncovered a much larger, insidious truth about InnovateTech. The modern tech company, with its shiny facade, was built on a foundation of discriminatory practices, systematically disadvantaging its most loyal and diverse workforce. The judge ruled in my favor, not only reinstating my full pension bonus, but also awarding significant additional damages for emotional distress and punitive damages against InnovateTech for their systemic discrimination. It was a resounding victory, far beyond what I had initially sought. Mr. Harrison stared blankly ahead, his face ashen. He had tried to sabotage my bonus, and in doing so, he had inadvertently brought down an entire discriminatory system. His individual racism had become the catalyst for exposing a corporate injustice. As the judge concluded, Mr. Thorne immediately requested a private meeting with Ms. Davies, clearly desperate to mitigate the fallout. The ruling opened the door for potential class action lawsuits from other affected employees, a massive blow to InnovateTech's reputation and finances. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The weight of 2 decades of quiet dedication, followed by months of intense struggle, lifted from my shoulders. Lena rushed to embrace me, tears in her eyes. Miss Chen offered a knowing, triumphant smile. Mr. Harrison, surrounded by his now frantic legal team, watched me leave. His attempt to sabotage my pension bonus had not only failed but had backfired spectacularly, exposing his own prejudice and the company's hidden practices. He had tried to bury me, but instead, he had unearthed a truth that would shake InnovateTech to its core. My fight, born out of personal injustice, had blossomed into something far greater. It was a victory not just for me, but for every employee who had been marginalized, overlooked, or discriminated against in the name of modernization and efficiency. The cabin upstate felt closer than ever, but now, it also felt like a symbol of a future where justice, however hard-won, could prevail.